Welcome back. Today, a craftsman faces a massive reconstruction project, reviving a shattered bearing housing using traditional foundry methods. The process begins not with steel, but with sand. A heavy metal ring is seated into the drag. Specialized casting sand must be packed tightly around the form to capture every dimensional detail. Even minor voids can cause fatal flaws when molten metal flows into the mold. A thin rod establishes a sprue hole. This vertical channel allows liquid steel to reach the cavity while venting trapped gases. The upper half of the mold requires immense compression. Loose sand cannot withstand the thermal shock and hydraulic pressure of a heavy pour. Using a heavy iron tamper and deliberate foot pressure, the mixture is compacted into a dense, solid block. The high clay content in the sand mixture helps it bind together. Once fully rammed, the mold provides a rigid negative space capable of shaping hundreds of pounds of molten scrap. With the molds prepared, attention shifts to the fuel source. A specialized rotary furnace is loaded with sorted scrap metal. Feeding the crucible requires a calculated mix of dense fragments and lighter alloys to control the final metallurgical properties. Propane provides the initial heat source, generating the intense thermal output needed to bridge the gap between solid scrap and liquid metal. Igniting the furnace introduces a massive influx of oxygen. As the internal temperature crosses 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, impurities burn off into thick plumes of smoke. The dark emissions slowly clear as the crucible achieves a steady, oxygen-rich burn. Inside, the metal transitions from a dull red to a blinding, white-hot fluid. The rotary action of the furnace ensures an even distribution of heat. Constant motion prevents cold spots from forming in the molten ore, keeping the alloy homogeneous. A long steel rod is used to skip slag from the surface. Removing these oxidized impurities is critical. Any trapped slag would create brittle inclusions in the final casting, compromising the bearing's load capacity.
मेरे नल जी साइड लेकर चला से तमाम ओए सफेद की नहीं पता है सच्ची बात कीती है करना है मान ए ना काम नहीं पकड़े वो अगला
Once the pour cools and solidifies, the fragile sand structure is broken away. The metal that emerges is crude, covered in a thick layer of casting scale. A sledgehammer frees the rough cylindrical blank from its gating system. The rough casting is heavily oxidized and dimensionally oversized. It is mounted into the four-jaw chuck of a heavy-duty industrial lathe. Centering this immense mass requires precise torque to ensure the piece spins evenly on a true axis. Once perfectly plumbed, the machining process begins by addressing the inner diameter. A high-speed steel cutting tool steadily removes the rough internal texture. Machining raw castings demands deep, deliberate cuts to push past the hardened outer scale. If the tool bit rides too lightly on the surface, it will dull instantly against the abrasive crust. With the interior trued, the tool post is repositioned. Long horizontal passes along the exterior circumference peel away the dark surface material. A bright, consistent steel cylinder begins to emerge from the rough blank. Precision in bearing construction relies on exact geometry. The outer corner receives a chamfer, a deliberate bevel that relieves stress concentrations and prevents edge chipping during assembly. Next, the facing operation cuts perpendicularly across the side profile. This establishes a perfectly flat, parallel reference surface for the entire bearing assembly. A specialized boring bar is then introduced to cut an internal relief groove. This channel must maintain a rigid tolerance. It serves as the precise raceway where the steel rollers will eventually sit, bearing the rotational friction of the finished machine. The workpiece is flipped to address the remaining raw surface. Facing the second side requires matching the exact thickness dimension of the inner race. Even a fraction of a millimeter in variance could cause catastrophic binding when the bearing is placed under a live load. A final dimensional inspection confirms the critical tolerances have been met.
बंद करके गोली जाने जान दे saya harus nanti masih di rumah ya.
The heavy lathe work leaves microscopic, razor-sharp burrs along the newly cut edges. A hand grinder carefully knocks down these sharp transitions. Smooth edges ensure safe handling and prevent metal splinters from contaminating the bearing housing. With the inner race completed, the outer casing undergoes the same methodical transformation. A new, oxidized cylinder is mounted and spun. Deep turning passes strip away decades of rust and structural fatigue. Restoring heavy machinery relies heavily on salvaging viable base material. By cutting down to clean, undisturbed steel, the craftsman creates a fresh foundation for the moving parts. Hours into the process, the final outer track is shaped. A deep, square groove is plunged into the exterior wall. This acts as the outer raceway, requiring a flawless surface finish to minimize friction and wear. Every pass of the cutter is slower and more deliberate than the last. The face is trimmed flat to match the inner ring. A final, whisper-thin pass is taken across the steel. This light cut doesn't remove significant bulk. It simply burnishes the surface to a high polish finish. The chuck jaws are finally released. What began as a rough sand-cast block of scrap is now a mirrored, dimensionally perfect mechanical component. Assembly is a matter of pure geometry. The newly machined inner and outer races are placed concentrically on the floor. Dozens of hardened steel rollers are methodically slotted into the gap between them. Each roller displaces the exact right amount of space, packing tightly against its neighbor. Together, they distribute massive rotational loads across the entire circumference of the steel. The final rollers lock the entire structure into place. The outer ring spins with smooth, heavy resistance, a sign of tight tolerances and proper alignment. What was once a pile of broken fragments and rusted scrap has been fundamentally transformed. The rebuilt bearing stands as a testament to traditional foundry casting and exact manual machining. It is heavy, functional, and ready to return to a lifetime of invisible work.
हाँ यार बड़ा मसला कश्मीर आ बना एक गोली लाभ जावे आना और गाड़ी जा रही है